Everything you know about gladiators is wrong. Hollywood made you believe they fought to the death. Every movie shows the same scene. Two warriors enter the arena. One walks out. One dies in the sand. The crowd roars. The emperor gives a thumbs down. Here's the truth Rome buried for 2,000 years. 90% of gladiators survived their fights, not because Rome was merciful, not because the crowds were soft, because gladiators were expensive investments. A trained gladiator cost as much as 10 regular slaves. And Rome didn't throw away $150,000 investments for entertainment. Today you're going to find out why gladiators were deliberately fattened up like livestock to absorb sword cuts. How one enslaved fighter became Rome's biggest celebrity and refused freedom 4 times. And the truth about that famous thumbs-down gesture? Hollywood made the entire thing up. Let me show you the real gladiator industry. The economics, the training, the survival strategies. And when you understand how it actually worked, the entire system becomes more disturbing than any movie. Let's start with the money, because that's where everything begins. Imagine you're a Roman Lanista. That's a gladiator owner. You run a business, a brutal business, but still a business with profit margins, overhead costs, and return on investment calculations. A regular farm slave costs 500 denarii. That's about $15,000 in today's money. These are unskilled laborers. You put them in the fields, they harvest grain, they die young from exhaustion. Simple economics. A trained gladiator costs 5,000 denarii, $150,000. 10 times more expensive than a farm slave. Why would anyone pay 10 times more for a slave who might die in his first fight? Because if he doesn't die, he generates massive returns. Let me break down where that 5,000 denarii goes. Acquisition. You can't just grab anyone off the street. Gladiators needed specific qualities. Young enough to train, but old enough to have developed muscle. Strong enough to fight, but not so strong they'd be impossible to control. And most importantly, psychologically capable of violence in front of 50,000 screaming spectators. Most gladiators came from 3 sources: war prisoners. When Rome conquered a territory, they didn't kill all the defeated soldiers. That would be wasteful. Instead, they sorted them. The skilled fighters, the ones who showed courage in battle, the ones who survived multiple engagements. Those men were valuable. Julius Caesar's records mention 300 Gallic warriors sold to a training school in Capua after a major battle. 800 denarii each. These men had already proven themselves in combat. They just needed to be retrained for arena fighting instead of battlefield warfare. Second source: condemned criminals. Men sentenced to death. But instead of immediate execution, they'd be offered a choice. Die today, or become a gladiator and maybe earn your freedom. Most took the deal. Because humans are wired to grasp at any chance of survival, even a slim one. These men signed contracts giving up all rights. One preserved contract from 94 AD states, "I hereby surrender myself to be burned, beaten, killed by iron, or any method the Lanista chooses. My body belongs to him." But even condemned criminals were valuable property, because the Lanista paid the state for them. Records show condemned criminals selling for 300 to 500 denarii each, so even a dead man walking represented an investment. And investments need protection. Third source: volunteers. Free Roman citizens so desperate for money that they'd sell themselves into slavery. This shocks most people. Why would a free man become a gladiator slave? Desperation. Debt. The allure of fame. See, successful gladiators could become celebrities. They made money. They had groupies. Women wanted them. Men wanted to be them. If you were a poor, free Roman with no prospects, no job, no future, becoming a gladiator was a lottery ticket. One preserved contract shows a volunteer receiving 2,000 denarii up front, plus 20% of any prize money. That 2,000 denarii was more money than a common laborer made in 5 years. But the contract also said, "The Lanista owns you completely. You may be beaten, burned, or killed at his discretion. That was the price of the signing bonus. You became a slave. But a slave with a chance at wealth and fame. So that's acquisition. War prisoners, condemned criminals, desperate volunteers, each representing a significant investment. But buying the human was just the beginning. Training took 2 to 3 years minimum. Every single day of those years, you had to pay for everything. Food. Gladiators ate 3,500 calories a day, more than most Romans. And here's where it gets interesting. The diet was specifically designed to build a protective fat layer over muscle. Modern scientists analyzed bones from a gladiator graveyard in Turkey. They found gladiators consumed 20% more calcium than average Romans. Their bones were denser, harder to break. The primary food was barley. Tons of it. Ancient writers called gladiators hordearii, barley men. They'd mix the barley with beans, onions, and sometimes small amounts of meat. Why the fat layer? Because in arena combat, most wounds were slashing cuts. A fat layer could mean the difference between a surface wound and a lethal cut. One gladiator physician named Galen wrote that the fat layer was nature's armor that saved lives countless times. They were literally fattening up these fighters like livestock. More padding meant more survival. More survival meant protecting the investment, housing. Gladiators lived in the Ludus, the training school. One excavated school in Pompeii had barracks for 80 gladiators, separate quarters for trainers, a medical wing with surgical tools, and even a shrine where gladiators could pray before fights. The cells were small, about 8 by 8 feet, shared by 2 or 3 gladiators. But they had beds, access to baths, decent living conditions because healthy gladiators were valuable gladiators. Professional trainers called doctors, retired gladiators who'd survived 10 or more fights. They earned 50 denarii per month per student. A top school might employ 5 to 10 trainers. That's thousands of denarii yearly just for training staff, weapons, and armor. A full set cost about 300 denarii. And you couldn't just buy one set. Equipment wore out. Swords dulled, shields cracked. You needed multiple sets. One inventory list from Capua shows they maintained 140 sets of equipment for 60 active gladiators. More than 2 sets per fighter. Medical care. This was huge. Gladiators had access to the best doctors in Rome. Better than most wealthy Romans could afford. Why? Because a gladiator with an improperly healed broken bone was worthless. You needed skilled physicians who could treat combat injuries and get fighters back in the arena. The most famous gladiator physician was Galen. Before he became physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Galen worked at a gladiator school. He wrote extensively about treating sword wounds, stopping hemorrhages, setting broken bones. One passage from his writings. In 4 years at the school, I lost only 5 men to their wounds. My predecessor lost 60. The difference was surgical technique and immediate wound care. That was the level of medical expertise protecting these investments. Let's add it all up. One school in Pompeii spent 100,000 denarii yearly maintaining 50 fighters. That's 2,000 denarii per gladiator per year. $24,000 in modern money, just for upkeep. And gladiators only fought 3 to 4 times per year. Why so rarely? Because fights needed to be events, special occasions. If gladiators fought every week, nobody would care. The rarity created demand. So let's do the full calculation. You invest 5,000 denarii to acquire and train a gladiator. Year 0. You're already $150,000 in the hole. Year 1. 2,000 denarii in upkeep. The gladiator fights 3 times. Wins twice, loses once. The crowd loves him. He survives. You collect maybe 3,500 denarii. Net year 1, minus 1,500 denarii. You're at minus 6,500 total. Year 2. Same upkeep. 4 fights because he's building a reputation. Wins 3. Collects 5,000 denarii. Net year 2 plus 3,000. You're down to minus 3,500 total. Year 3. He's now a mid-level star. Upkeep is still 2,000. but he fights 5 times and brings in 7,500 denarii. Net year 3, plus 5,500. You're finally profitable. Plus 2,000 total. 3 years to break even on a successful gladiator. What happens if he dies in year 1? In his first fight, you lose everything. The entire 5,000 denarii acquisition cost. The 2,000 in upkeep. Plus the opportunity cost of training time. Total loss. 7,000 denarii. $210,000. This is why Rome created an entire system to prevent gladiator deaths. But before I explain that system, let me tell you about the most successful gladiator investment in Roman history. His name was Flamma, a Syrian slave, captured in war, sold to a training school. Everything about his life should have been miserable, but Flamma became a superstar. He fought 34 times over 21 years. His record? 21 wins, 9 draws, 4 losses. 4 losses. Think about that. He lost 4 times. In any of those 4 fights, he could have been killed, but he wasn't. Because by his second year, Flamma had become too valuable to kill. The crowds loved him. When his name was announced, 50,000 people would chant it. Women wrote graffiti about him all over Pompeii. Flamma the Secutor makes my heart burn. Flamma, glory of the girls. He had female fans who followed his career like modern pop star groupies. Merchants used his image on pottery and jewelry. He was a brand. An endorsement deal 2,000 years ago. And here's the most fascinating part. Flamma was offered freedom 4 separate times. The Ludus, the wooden sword that symbolized manumission, freedom from slavery. 4 times his owner or sponsors offered it to him. 4 times he refused. Why would a slave refuse freedom? Some historians think he loved the arena, the violence, the crowd, the rush of combat. Others think he was practical. Being a freed ex-gladiator meant poverty. No job skills, no prospects. You were still marked as former slave. Nobody would hire you for decent work. But being a star gladiator meant wealth, respect, fame, comfort, security. Flamma made the calculation. His life as a famous slave was better than his life as a free nobody. He kept fighting until age 30. Then he retired. He didn't die in the arena. He died of natural causes as a wealthy, famous, enslaved man. His tombstone still exists. It describes all 34 fights in detail. Like a career highlights real carved in stone. This was the peak of the gladiator system. A slave so valuable that he lived better than most free Romans. A human investment that generated returns for 2 decades. And the system produced dozens of fighters like him. Another star, Triumphus. We know less about his fight record, but his face appears on over 20 pieces of pottery and jewelry that archaeologists have found. Companies used his image to sell products. Tetrates. A heavy fighter who won 17 straight fights. When he finally lost his 18th, the crowd chanted his name so loudly and for so long that the sponsor had no choice but to grant mercy. One historian calculated that Tetrates' 18th fight drew 55,000 spectators. More than any other fight that year. People paid premium prices to see if the undefeated streak would continue. Killing Tetrates after 1 loss would have been like an NFL team executing their quarterback for 1 bad game. The crowd would riot. You'd lose all future revenue from people coming to see him fight again. These stars were economic assets for everyone in the industry. The owners, the sponsors, the merchants selling food and souvenirs, the betting operations. Everyone made money when stars kept fighting. So stars didn't die. Now let me explain the training that created these stars. A Ludus wasn't a prison. It was a professional combat academy. Brutal, yes, but organized and systematic. Gladiators were divided into specific fighting types. Each type had specialized equipment and techniques. Let me describe the 2 most important ones. First type, the shield fighter. Large rectangular shield, 4 feet tall. Short sword, 18 to 24 inches long. Bronze helmet with face guard. Arm guard on the sword arm. Leg guard on the lead leg. but no body armor. Torso completely exposed. Why no body armor? 2 reasons. First, mobility. Body armor is heavy. Gladiators needed to move fast. Second, crowd appeal. The audience wanted to see blood. A fighter in full armor was boring. The fighting style was defensive. Hide behind the massive shield. Wait for your opponent to make a mistake. Then strike fast with the short sword. Quick thrust to the throat or gut. Pull back behind the shield. Wait for the next opening. The sword was designed for thrusting, not slashing. You'd stab, retract, stab again. Efficient killing. Second type. The net fighter. Complete opposite. No armor at all. Just a shoulder guard on one arm. They carried a weighted net and a 3-pronged spear called a trident. The strategy was pure speed and distance control. Stay mobile. Throw the net to entangle the opponent. Stab with the trident while they're tangled. Pull the net back. Throw again. Net fighters were the fastest gladiators. They had to be. One hit from an armored opponent would end them. The crowd had mixed feelings about net fighters. Some loved the speed and skill. Others thought fighting without armor was cowardly. There was an entire social debate about whether they were real gladiators. These two types were often matched against each other because the contrast was dramatic. Heavy shield fighter versus unarmored net fighter. Defense versus speed. It made for exciting matches. Now here's what training looked like. Morning session. 3 to 4 hours. First hour. Striking practice against a 6-foot wooden post. You'd practice your signature strikes with weighted training weapons. The training sword weighed 3 times as much as a real one. The training shield weighed twice as much. Why weighted? So when you picked up real equipment in the arena, it felt light and fast. One historian recreated this training in the 1990s. He found that 1 hour of post-work with weighted weapons was more exhausting than 2 hours of modern boxing training. Second hour. Footwork drills. The training ground had grids marked in the sand. Specific patterns you'd practice until they became muscle memory. Forward advance while maintaining shield position. Diagonal retreat while keeping eyes on opponent. Circular movement to flank. Quick direction changes. These patterns were designed specifically for fighting on sand. The arena floor was unstable. One training manual says, "The gladiator must learn to fight on sand as a sailor learns to walk on a ship." Third hour. Sparring with wooden weapons. Full contact practice fights. These weren't gentle. Bruises were expected. Broken bones happened regularly. But wooden weapons couldn't kill. One account mentions a fighter breaking his arm during sparring. The owner paid for 3 months of medical care and recovery time, because letting that arm heal wrong would ruin his career. Afternoon session. 2 to 3 hours. Strength and conditioning. Lifting weighted equipment. Distance running while carrying weights. Endurance drills, because arena fights could last a long time. If both fighters were skilled and defensive, a fight might go for an hour. You needed stamina. And here's the disturbing part. They were also taught how to die. If you lost and the sponsor decided you should die, you had to accept it with dignity. No begging. No crying. The proper death pose. Kneel. Place your shield flat on the ground. Rest your left hand on the shield. Tilt your head back to expose your throat. Stay still. Let the winner strike cleanly. This was called receiving the sword well, and it was practiced hundreds of times. One Roman writer described watching a training session where trainers critiqued death poses. "No, you're flinching. The crowd can see fear. Die with pride. Make them admire your courage even as you die, because even in death you were performing." Now, given all this investment in training, why did 90% survive? Because of 3 economic mechanisms. Mechanism 1. The death compensation law. When a gladiator lost, the decision to kill him wasn't made by the winner or the crowd. The decision belonged to the munerius. That's the sponsor. Usually a politician trying to win votes, but Roman law required. If the sponsor ordered a gladiator killed, he had to compensate the owner for full market value. the full 5,000 denarii. $150,000. Most politicians couldn't afford that. One preserved account book from a sponsor named Gaius Marius shows his total budget was 50,000 denarii. He hosted 117 gladiator fights over 8 days. His budget for death compensation? 10,000 denarii. 2 gladiators maximum. What happened? Out of 117 fights, exactly 2 gladiators died. Not because the fights weren't brutal, because Gaius Marius couldn't afford to kill more than 2. After the first 2 deaths, every subsequent defeated gladiator received mercy. Gaius would signal mercy. The gladiator would live, and Gaius wouldn't have to pay. Death compensation created an economic incentive for mercy. Mechanism 2. Star power. I already told you about Flamma, Triumphus, Tetrates. These men were too valuable to kill. The crowds loved them. Killing them meant killing future revenue. Mechanism 3. Industry regulation. By the 1st century AD, Rome had about 10,000 active gladiators across the empire. This was a massive industry. If gladiators died at high rates, the entire industry would collapse. So the Roman government passed regulations. The Senatus Consultum of 38 AD created standardized rules. Rule 1. All fights must have an official referee called the Summa Ludus, a retired gladiator who could stop a fight if one fighter was too injured to continue safely. Rule 2. Medical staff must be present at every event. Doctors standing by with bandages and surgical tools. The moment a fight ended, they'd rush in. Rule 3. All contracts must include death compensation clauses. These weren't optional. Roman law required them. The industry was regulated like a modern professional sport, because it generated massive revenue. But gladiators did die sometimes. So when? Exception 1. Noxiae executions. If you were sentenced to damnatio ad gladium, execution by sword, you weren't really a gladiator. You were a dead man who happened to die in an arena. Noxi received no training, no armor. Sometimes a wooden sword while facing an armed fighter. They were thrown in during lunch breaks between main bouts. These men had a 100% death rate. Exception 2. Sine missione fights. Extremely rarely, a sponsor would declare a fight sine missione, without release. One fighter must die. These were so rare that historians recorded them by specific date and location. The most famous, Priscus versus Verus at the Colosseum opening in 79 AD. Both fought for hours, evenly matched, both exhausted. Finally, at the same moment, both dropped their weapons and surrendered simultaneously. Emperor Titus granted both their freedom. The crowd cheered for 20 minutes straight. That's how rare these fights were. So rare they became legendary. Exception 3. Rule breaking. If a gladiator violated the rules, striking after surrender, attacking the referee, the crowd's wrath was instant. One piece of Pompeii graffiti. Urbicus the fighter struck his opponent after he yielded. The crowd demanded death. Urbicus was fed to the lions that afternoon. Exception 4. The failed investment. If a gladiator lost repeatedly, showed no skill, couldn't entertain, his owner might eventually cut losses. More often though, failed gladiators were just sold to mining companies. A slower death. Before I close, let me destroy one final Hollywood myth, the thumbs down gesture. You've seen it 1,000 times. Emperor sitting in his box. Defeated gladiator kneeling. The emperor extends his arm, thumb pointing down. Death. This entire image is fiction. It comes from an 1872 painting by a French artist named Jean-Léon Gérôme. He was working from vague references in ancient texts. He made an artistic choice. He decided turn thumb meant thumb down for death. Hollywood saw the painting, copied it. Now everyone thinks that's how it worked. Roman historians barely mention thumb gestures at all. When they do, the descriptions are vague. Modern scholars think thumb hidden in a closed fist meant mercy. Thumb extended outward meant death. But honestly, we don't know for certain. The gesture wasn't important because the sponsor made the actual decision. not the crowd. And most games didn't have an emperor present anyway. These were local politicians hosting games in provincial cities. So here's the complete truth about Roman gladiators. They were professional athletes in a profit-driven industry. 90% survived because killing them destroyed massive investments. Training took years. Costs were enormous. Replacing dead gladiators was expensive and time-consuming. The gladiators who did die? They were economic failures. The ones whose value had dropped below replacement cost. And here's what makes this disturbing. This exact system still exists today. Professional athletes, pop stars, social media influencers, anyone whose body and image generate profit for someone else. You're valuable as long as you perform, as long as the numbers go up, as long as fans keep paying to see you. The moment you stop generating returns, you're replaced, discarded, forgotten. From ancient Rome to modern entertainment, the calculation is always the same. How much is this human life worth to me? If the answer is more than replacement cost, you're protected. If it's less, you're gone. Flamma understood this 2,000 years ago. He knew his value as a famous slave was higher than his value as a free nobody. So he stayed enslaved. Because at least as a slave, he mattered. That's the real horror of the gladiator system. Not the violence, not the slavery, but the cold economic logic that decides whether you live or die based on spreadsheet calculations. Next video. Female gladiators. They existed. Rome tried to erase them from history, and when you understand why, you'll see how terrified Roman men were of women who could fight. Subscribe if you want the brutal truths about Rome.